Thank you, and welcome to another week of Gospel of Peace. My name is Roger, and today I'm really interested in diving into the first chapter a little bit of Revelation. Okay, so last week we kind of talked about the seven churches and the warnings that are there, but I backed up a little bit because I really hadn't planned on covering chapter 1 or any part of it until I got into it today with my schoolwork. So I decided, because I was into that particular section, I would go ahead and share some of the things that I found really fascinating, specifically about the description of Christ here in this chapter. So if we look at chapter 1 in Revelation, starting in verse 12, it says, "I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me, and as I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool and white as snow, and his eyes were blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in the furnace, and his voice was the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he had 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp double-edged sword, and his face was shining like the sun in all its brilliance." So the cool part about this description here is it ties in a lot of Old Testament content. For instance, the sound of rushing waters, that is a common description used by the prophets to describe when they knew it was God speaking to them, because his voice was the sound of many rushing waters. The cool correlation there is that John here, not Paul, started to say Paul, John here is actually making that connection to Jesus and his divinity here. That he is the Son of, not only is he the Son of God, but he's part of God. He is God incarnate. He was the God made flesh in this world. Now, we back up a little bit to a couple of these descriptions. Among the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man. Now, I'm going to back you up back to the book of Daniel. Remember, Daniel was cast into exile because of the siege that Nebuchadnezzar had on Israel. He took captive all these people, and Daniel and his 3 buddies were part of the entourage that got to be named wise men there in Nebuchadnezzar's court. Well, if you remember the story, Nebuchadnezzar builds this large statue of gold, basically of himself, and at the base of that statue was a fiery furnace where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown. And it's an interesting correlation here, because when Nebuchadnezzar looks into the furnace and sees that they're not burning, he sees a 4th figure. And the term they use there is like the Son of Man. Now, John here is talking about Jesus. So the correlation there is that he's referencing that same description to something Daniel had said Nebuchadnezzar saw. So you see, that tie there means that Jesus was present in the Old Testament too, which is really awesome. So John's making that correlation that just as God and Jesus were back in the Old Testament, he has arrived here today to show me this message. So I love that correlation there. I thought that was really fascinating to see those two tied together. Now, there are other descriptions here that are very interesting. If we look at the chapter, or verse 14 down through 16, there is a kind of pattern that this follows. See, the first description and the last description are both about Jesus' head. First description being his hair is like fine wool and white as snow. But the last description is his face shone with like the sun in all of its brilliance. So this is really cool here, because any depiction of God from the old prophets, nobody could see his face because it was so bright. It was bright as the sun, like looking directly in the sunlight. So we have here this perfect image of Jesus as God, but he's God revealed, because he can make out features of his face, which is new for Christians. at this time. Most of these Jewish converts that became Christians at this time period, they had never seen the face of God. They couldn't describe his appearance. All they know is they could hear his voice, they could hear the sound of many rushing waters, and they would see this bright, blinding light radiating from what should be his face in any of the descriptions from the prophets. And yet, because Jesus has revealed himself to man, and there is a face now to the voice, John is able to see characteristics of that face. Now, granted, this is a vision, and he's not directly looking at it, and some of these are metaphorical imagery, but he can make out a face. He can make out certain aspects of it, such as the fact that his hair is white as snow, and he can make out a texture. It's like wool, a very fine wool. So there's enough there for him to grasp on and know that this is Jesus, the Son of Man he's seeing. The next correlation we see coming in from that is specific features of his face. For instance, he can see his eyes blazing with fire. Now, anytime you look at the descriptions of God and the descriptions of angels, their eyes usually blaze with fire. And that is because they are looking into the heart of the person they're speaking to. They're burning away all of the deception that they may try to show up. And in most cases, when the prophet or the individual sees this angel with these burning eyes, or the Son of Man with the burning eyes, they immediately become afraid and fall to their face. There are many, many examples where, prophets have been taken into a vision and have been confronted by God in this manner. And immediately they fall down prostrate on the ground. One prophet even goes, "Whoa, I'm undone, for I've seen God," and he knew that meant death, because the blazing eyes could see right into him and see how sinful he really was. But here, John, though afraid, is still able to describe what he's seeing. He doesn't cower completely in fear. Instead, he knows that he's looking at the Son of God, and that the Son of God is revealing something special to him, and that look that he's given him is burning away all deception that could be in him when he's writing this prophecy. The next thing he shows, or later as he's coming out of this description, you see the second to last thing is his mouth. And out of his mouth is coming a double-edged sword. Now, the sword is very important. Ephesians 6:17 says, "Take up the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." So the things that Jesus is about to speak to him are from God. They are the sword. They are the word of God. They're coming out. Now, the cool thing about the word of God is 2 Timothy 2:15 says that it will divide the truth, separating not whole truth and fallacy from biblical, God-given truth. So this whole message that he's handing out and handing over is going to be full of wisdom and truth straight from God. And John can see this because of the image of the sword coming out of his mouth, because the sword of God is the word of God. Another description that he brings in a little bit closer to the middle, because there's 7 different descriptors he uses, is that his hands and his feet. His feet are like burnished bronze, something that's been burned in a fire and is still hot and glowing. Now, there are a couple really cool aspects about this. First of all, it's his feet that he's describing, which means his feet can move. Now, any time angels are described with skin tones or body features that are of burnished bronze, that indicates the glory of God, if you correlate that with the Old Testament writings. But I find another interesting use of this description here, especially when you base it on the time period of when John's writing. Roman Empire was strong. All right. When the Jewish community came into being many centuries before, it was along the Bronze Age. All right, that's where the strongest weapons were at that time. That's, a lot of the sharp tools and the armor was made of bronze. And polished bronze for the armies were just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Okay? But John here is in the Roman age. And now the strongest metal out there is steel and iron. And they're specifically iron. And they're making weapons and armors with this iron that frankly could cleave a bronze sword in two. Bronze is a soft metal. Okay? And it's very pliable. Which means that with his description, he's describing, although the glory of Jesus and the glory of God is walking through this earth, and that's what the image of the feet is for, to let you know that he's not a stationary figure. He walks, he moves among the people, but he's also pliable to their concerns. He's not going to be hard as iron and crush them. He's going to be soft. He's still going to be firm, because bronze is firm, but he's going to be a little bit softer about it. He's going to tell you the truth, and he's going to give you encouragement, and he's going to hope that you embrace him and come to him because he's pliable. He's not hard and rigid to the point where he is unbending, as he would be if his description was of iron. So I always, when I was reading that, I thought that was a very nice touch that John had there. Now, I could be way off base. I don't know his motives or anything, but to me, that's what that speaks of, and I thought that was really cool to share. And then he comes up and shows in his right hand, he holds the 7 stars. Now, again, we were already told that the 7 stars earlier are those 7 angels that watch over the 7 churches. So he has control over them in his hands. He's so big, he's so large that he holds the angels in his hands. Means he has the ability to wield them, to use them, to send them and work them where he wants. All power and authority has been given unto me, said Jesus to his disciples before he left this earth. That's what those 7 stars, his power, his authority, his ability to command and act, right there in his hand. And finally, the last description that he uses is his voice. Now, the voice is in the center of this literary device that they use called a chiasm. Basically, you start with one description and you move out, and then you come back to that one description. And every time you go out, it changes location. But when you're coming back, it does those same locations in reverse. But in the center of this is God's voice. The voice that sounds like many rushing waters. God is unchanging when it comes to his word. So it should sound exactly the same from beginning to end. From the beginning of the Bible, that's what people heard, the sound of many rushing waters speaking to them whenever God spoke. Jesus is no different. At the end of the Bible, at the last book, the revelation of Jesus Christ, his voice is still the sound of many rushing waters. There is no difference. There's no separating them. They are the same being. I love how he ties that together using that as the center point. Now, when it comes to Revelation, there is tremendous amount of imagery, and there are going to be many things that it's going to be a matter of opinion on. And this is one of those. How you view that is based on how you've read the Bible and how you've come to understand it. I encourage you to read this chapter again, especially that description, and look and find those places where he ties it into the Old Testament descriptions. Ezekiel, the burnished bronze feet, that's a description straight out of Ezekiel. Isaiah has the rushing waters. We already talked about the sword in Ephesians and in Timothy. the point is, however you interpret that vision, that image of Christ, there is more to it. There's a deeper understanding to it. That's what makes Revelation so great. That what inspires me to continue to read and study Revelation as I do in this class, because all the information, all the little nuances and things that maybe on a general read through that I would not pick up normally is revealed. So I encourage you, please go through and read this. Now, one thing I do want to point out, that after John gets done acknowledging all these facts and then looks at the brilliance of his face, which shines like the sun, he does fall on his feet. And then it says, Jesus placed his right hand on me and said, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I'm alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. Therefore, write what you've seen." My friends, Jesus wants us to see him as he is. All of his aspects, all the vivid imagery that comes with it, and the meanings that go forth. When we look at the letters and we study the letters, each different aspect of Jesus is presented in those letters, depending on where the church is. And the letters themselves form that chiasmic setup. Because we got the letter that for the church that needs a little correction. Then we got the letter for the church that needs no correction. Then we got the letter for the church that needs a lot of correction. And then it goes in backwards for each of the churches. So when we look at the picture and the way he sets up this description of Jesus, we can mirror it straight to the descriptions he uses in the churches as to which aspect of Jesus is falling out. Is it the voice that's calling out? Is it his eyes that are seeing the truth of their situation? Is it his hair? The white hair that shows that he is wise, because we attribute white hair and the snow color of hair to wisdom and age of an elder. There's so many cool descriptions in there just in those first 3 chapters. And then the amazing thing is these descriptions can be found at the end of Revelation again. When Jesus is moving and back on this earth and is starting to do his thing. John ties it over that this Jesus that's in the beginning giving the message is the same Jesus at the end that's coming back to rule and reign. I was so blessed to read this lesson and so blessed I get a chance to write on it in school that I just had to share it with you all as part of this series. I'll be sending out another video a little later for the next couple chapters in Revelation. But I just had to get this one out. It's a little late, but I know you all will forgive me. And if you don't, that's fine. Just leave me a comment saying, hey, don't do it again. But we're going through this journey in Revelation together, and I hope and pray that it is inspiring you to, if nothing else, read through Revelation again. If you like what you've seen, go ahead and leave a comment down below or hit the little like button. If you want to be updated whenever I put out a new video, please hit the little subscribe button and the bell icon if you're following me on YouTube. That way you can be updated whenever I release a new video. Thank you so much for joining me, and may God bless you through our journey here at A Gospel of Peace.